Hello there, and welcome to Brainwaves, bringing you the best in board game and tabletop gaming news. I'm Jamie Adams, and I would normally be joined by Iain McAllister at this point, but he's not here. Sorry about that. Actually, do you know what? Do you want to come with me, and we'll go and have a wee look around the Brainwave studios just to see if we can find him, because I saw his car in the driveway. He should be here. Iain. Oh, sometimes he sleeps in RPG Corner, but the fire's been out. Oh, okay. The garden's looking good, but definitely not here. Iain? Iain, don't make me get angry.
And that's why, Iain, this is an incredible limited time deal. We are talking about this as the very top of the market right now. I mean, the money you stand to make by selling this place, I mean, it's prime real estate. I mean, you can imagine it, right? That you could put 3 blocks of flats on this site. That's how big this studio is.
Yeah, that's true.
Lots of eateries. I mean, my God, you could have a Franco Manca down there. Isn't that what you want?
It has been the dream of my family.
Excuse me. Hi, James.
Oh, hi, Jamie.
James Naylor, isn't it?
Oh, hi, Jamie. Yeah.
Hi, man. Nice to see you.
James has been emailing me for the last week or so. He got this fantastic real estate deal, and I thought I'd get him in to have a little chat about that, and maybe like to sell the Brainwaves HQ. You know, after the issue at the start of the year with the multi-dimensional hole in the basement, I thought we might move and get somewhere less apocalyptic.
Iain. Sorry, James. 1 second, mate. Okay, just 1 second. Just one second. Iain, can I take you aside for a second?
Jamie, you've got to,
yes.
Sorry, Jamie. This is a limited time deal that I've got for Iain on the table. My
Okay.
buyer is very interested in moving very quickly.
Who is your buyer? I'm just interested.
My buyer is an undisclosed person. I can't reveal their identity, unfortunately, but they are a significant name in property.
Oh, okay. That's fine. I just need to... Yeah, just give me 2 secs, James. I just need to speak to Iain very quickly. Just a really minor thing.
Sure.
Iain,
is there a problem?
Iain, why? We can't sell this. Because this is in Sam's name. And Sam is currently somewhere in time. We can't do it.
I've forgotten he owned it.
Yeah, but we need to just pretend like we're interested.
Is he not technically dead?
We never found any remains, so technically he's dead and not dead. He's kind of a Schrodinger Sam, if you will. So right now, let's just think that we're interested. We'll get him along, do a financial correspondent or something, and we'll just keep it going for this podcast, okay?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. You deal with it. Yeah.
Cool,
sure.
Cool.
I'll go and burn these documents.
Good. James, hi. Listen, while we're mulling that over, would you like to join us for our podcast today and be our financial correspondent?
Jamie, I would love to do that. And anything I can to keep this deal moving.
Oh, fantastic. Yep, that's fine. We want to keep things moving. Absolutely. So, why don't you come into the studio and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Wow, I'd like to say you've got an absolutely lovely space here. This has got to be, 20,000 square feet at least?
19, 20 if I stretch my legs out.
It's the mirrors that make it look bigger.
I'm sure.
So yes, James, what do you do? Well, I mean, apart from selling wonderful property, what do you do? Tell everyone about yourself.
Other than trying to acquire property for various private clients, what I also like to do is I like to design board games. In particular, my own board game, which I'm hoping to bring to Kickstarter very soon, called Magnate the First City, which is a property theme game in which you are a developer trying to make as much money as you can in a property boom, which is kind of a bit of a coincidence, isn't it?
Jamie, it just arrived. James' game.
Oh, Oh, that looks beautiful. Look at that. I mean, James, this is incredibly fortuitous. I mean, you a property developer and also a board game designer. I mean, what are the odds of this happening? You know,
It's absolutely astronomical, isn't it? You almost might not even believe that it was really true.
Maybe not,
That's
but
how astronomical it is.
Yeah, I mean, if you say that, I mean, the word suspension of disbelief come to mind, but let's not bandy about technical terms.
Best not.
No.
If you've heard it on the radio, it's got to be true, surely. Though we're not technically on the radio.
I think you're in the 2019 equivalent of the radio. I think that's what counts, right?
That is true enough.
Moving swiftly on, these are the headlines for the week of the 11th of November, 2019. The originator of Civilization games passes on. Hasbro profits fall, but D&D bucks the trend. And the Gygax estate lawsuit wraps up. All this and more on this episode of Brainwaves. We start this week with some rather unfortunate news. That is the passing of Francis Tresham, the board game designer, who is most famously known for 1829, and indeed the originator of the 18XX series of games, and the first Civilization game, without which we would not have Sid Meier's Civilization series or his Railroad Tycoon games either. Francis Tresham also introduced the first technology tree to gaming in Civilization. Now that's been copied in myriad of board games, role-playing games, video games, games in general since. A real giant of the industry. I mean, a wonderful legacy.
Huge figure, yeah.
Yes, and unfortunately I will have to stand up and say I didn't know who he was until I found out that he died, which just goes to show that I'm an uneducated dolt who really shouldn't be recording a podcast about board games because he doesn't know the name of Francis Tresham.
I mean, these are not the sort of games I play personally, and I didn't know his name either, but his influence is still around and will continue through all of gaming pretty much, as best I can tell.
It's astounding, isn't it? I mean, when you think that he invented to heavy gamers, Civ games and 18XX, the Civilization computer game and Railroad Tycoon. I mean, that blows my mind. I mean, interestingly, the Railroad Tycoon board game is actually one of my favourites. And I think it just shows you, again, just for me, what an influence to have on all of those games. He's got to be, actually, I guess, one of the most important people in games.
Yeah.
And so very, very sad to hear of his passing. Interestingly, I find out because on Twitter, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Jo Swinson, was tweeting about it.
Yes.
Because she is a massive... Yeah, because she's a massive Civilization fan. So, which I found really interesting.
Brainwaves has no political affiliation, though we totally do.
Moving on, Iain, I believe you have some news about Hasbro.
Yes, Hasbro have just put out their third quarter earnings, and it seems that their shares are down 16% and their profits have been down 19%. That's quite a bit of a fall for one of the biggest games companies in the world, with the tariffs on imported goods from China being seen as a major factor in the fall. According to Brian Goldner, the CEO of Hasbro, the tariffs have meant that large retailers have been buying from Hasbro domestically instead of making direct import orders, meaning Hasbro has had to take the cost of those tariffs and suffered as a result. Now, this is mostly from Hasbro Gaming. That does not include brands like Monopoly, you'll be glad to hear, Jamie, or Magic the Gathering, which has seen some growth alongside Transformers. Dungeons & Dragons has also bucked the trend. It's seen quite a bit of growth, probably down to things like Critical Role, the streaming, all that kind of thing that's happening right now in D&D. That's offsetting some decline in other gaming brands. There's always a little bit of chat about the sort of entrance of politics into gaming, and there's certain sectors of the community that always seem to object to any kind of political chat when games come out. This is just a stark reminder that no matter what you do, politics does affect games. These tariffs are a result of the China-American trade war. That's politics. It's in your games. Ta-da!
There's no way to avoid it. Like at the end of the day, like as much as I can understand that people might have objection to certain political stances that some creators take in terms of how they do things, but at the end of the day, you can't escape politics. Politics is all around you. You may only choose to ignore it. I think is the only possible choice you can make in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see as the Chinese-America trade war hots up exactly what effect that's going to have on the board game industry, because it could have some quite devastating effects. Because let's face it, most board games are made in China.
Yeah.
Are you getting Magnate printed in China?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what's really interesting now is that if you're even looking for kind of competencies in plastics, effectively you can't manufacture games on comparatively small runs in plastic anywhere else. So if you want to make a game like Magnate, which obviously is full of miniatures, if you want to do that and you're not ready to go to press with a 50,000 print run, you're going to be doing that in China because it was so much cheaper for so long. That's where all the competency has moved, and European American manufacturers simply cannot keep up in terms of those smaller production runs. So in fact, the problem will happen if the big tariffs that are sort of 20% tariffs that have been proposed on games come into force, that's going to directly impact a ton of games. They're all going to jump in price. There'll be no way around it.
Thanks very much, James. As our financial correspondent, we value your input. Jamie, legal shenanigans happening in the D&D estate, I hear.
Yes, I once again step into the comfortable shoes and waistcoat of the legal correspondent. This is a...
Very nice waistcoat.
Thank you very much. It is a update on a story I don't think we covered, but a story that has been making some waves, that of a lawsuit between Gail Gygax, the widow of one of the co-founders of Dungeons & Dragons, Gary Gygax, and Tom DeSanto, who is a producer of the X-Men and Transformers films. In 2018, there was a $30 million lawsuit brought against Gail Gygax by DeSanto, and it was recently dismissed without prejudice. Now, a bit of background to it. According to DeSanto, the lawsuit concerned the breach of a contract over a deal signed in 2016 between the two parties regarding the exclusive right to develop and exploit the Gygax intellectual property in all media, including film, TV, video games, merchandising, and licensing. And there was a move by Gail Gygax to try and negotiate a video game deal without DeSanto's participation. And there is another part related to his also published and unpublished material that he had written for Dungeons & Dragons. Now, DeSanto commented to video game site Kotaku, "Unfortunately, my lawyers and I discovered troubling facts about the estate, which prevented me from executing my plans for the estate. This dismissal was without prejudice, and the interest in the estate I negotiated for is still on the record. I remain and will always be a great admirer of Gary Gygax and mindful of his legacy as an icon in the gaming world."
If I remember rightly, there was a new Dungeons & Dragons film in the works. I wonder if this affects that in some way or form. I have no idea.
Have either of you seen any of the Dungeons & Dragons films?
Unfortunately.
Much my regret. Yeah, similarly with me, and I have in fact seen the first one.
Yep. I will admit, I love the first one because it's so ridiculous.
Well, we'll get to a story a little further down the line about D&D coming to TV screens near you soon, but it would be interesting to see a more direct connection between sort of Dungeons & Dragons and streaming, and certainly as we see companies like Amazon, Netflix looking to produce their own content, there's going to be a sort of run on any IP lying around that can be turned to series, surely. We're bound to hear more about this somewhere down the line.
Now, Iain, you say this, but what I'm hearing is 2020 remake of the Dungeons & Dragons Saturday morning cartoon.
Don't know how I feel about that.
I don't think I can even remember it. So to be honest, but I when I look at this, I kind of think it's a shame in some ways because the D&D wider universe has some really great campaign settings. You know, if you were taking stuff around, for example, like Forgotten Realms, for example, with you've got the whole Baldur's Gate series and all of what happened there. You've got some of those settings, maybe things like Dragonlance, things that you could adapt more than just sort of that they did what they did first time round. They're like, we're doing D&D, and you're like thinking that's like a rule set. Do you want to make a rule set into a film? I don't think that's going to be that exciting. It's going to be very art house. I feel like
it's just 2.5 hours of watching the Critical Role people play games on on film.
Pretty-
I'm sure
Ian-
people would go and watch that.
Maybe
Ian,
they
that's
would.
far too sensationalist.
Yeah.
It's an hour and a half of someone just rolling a dice over and over again.
Yeah. Well, someone else reads out the Dungeon Master's manual line by line.
Yes.
Something.
In black and white on a beach.
Werner Herzog reads the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons DM guide.
I would pay for that.
While someone else rolls the dice.
I also have to agree with Ian yet again. I'm in now. Yeah, Werner Herzog
Yeah.
is gonna do this film of the Dungeons and Dragons rule set.
If Audible can get Werner Herzog on board to read the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Guide, I am there for that.
Well, if you recall a wee while ago that the American, I think is the the American Institute for the Blind, is putting out the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual in
yes, that's right.
audio versions for blind and nearsighted players and games masters. Just get Werner Herzog to read it.
Please join the Brainwaves petition for Werner Herzog to read the D&D Player's Book.
Moving on to the rest of the news.
Yes, and a very exciting piece of news that has broken just an hour before we started recording. We are recording this on Remember, the 5th of November, which is why you'll probably hear the occasional firework going off in the background. There are fireworks over at Amazon as they have acquired the Critical Role animated series. Now, we reported on this earlier in the year, and Critical Role managed to raise $11.3 million in backing from Kickstarter backers to make a 10-episode animated series based on their Vox Machina adventures that they'd been streaming on Twitch and various other platforms. Now, they have got backing from Amazon. Amazon are going to be distributing this series. They have also put in a bit more money by the sounds of it, because not only do the seasons go up to 12 episodes, but a second season has already been ordered as well. So you're going to see even more of that animated goodness from Critical Role. Really cool thing to see. And like we were just saying about the Gary Gygax IPs, about the D&D IPs, I think we're going to see more of this from gaming. I think we're going to see more IPs picked up as streaming networks look for more content to put on their screens. Fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's also awesome to, I think, spread the fun of watching other people who are really good at roleplay. Because actually, the first time I watched a series like that was very recently, and I was amazed at how much I enjoyed it. Just watching people do an RPG.
This is pure animated, so it's basically based on those adventures, but I've never actually watched any of the streaming stuff, and it still sort of kind of blows my mind that people will watch people play D&D.
Yeah.
Still mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jamie, Hasbro are mashing things up.
They're mashing things up in a big blender and making something interesting. There's going to be a series of games to be released so far only in Target in America. We shall see when they make their way to the shores of the United Kingdom. It is the Hasbro Mashups line. There are 5 games being released initially, which are a mashup of 2 Hasbro games. So the 5 games are Candyland Connect 4, Guess Who Cluedo, or Clue if you're American, Taboo Speak Out, Monopoly Jenga, and Twister Scrabble Edition.
I'm sorry, what now? Twister Scrabble.
So the games will combine elements of both games. So Twister Scrabble, as an example, it'll have you spelling out words on a twister mat with letters on it instead of colours.
Spell Ocelot. My spine!
Oh, that actually sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Twister Scrabble? Like, well, you have to spell out a word. Oh, that just sounds brilliant. Like that. I have to say, even if probably a lot of them will be terrible, I am here for that kind of experimentation.
Oh, James, you're so cynical.
Yeah,
no,
that's...
yeah. Jenga Monopoly, if you're interested, is a Jenga tower, but all the blocks are Monopoly properties and spaces. So you have to get as many properties before the tower falls, and some of the blocks will give you special powers or penalties, like the go to jail one is missing a go.
Okay. So, like, Mayfair's somewhere difficult to get, I guess, and then you have to pull it out, and it's sort of... I think that kind of innovation is actually quite surprising to see that coming from a larger company. I mean, I guess they're doing it because they can just take 2 bases of different groups, run them together, and then get them to both to buy the weird mutated mashed up game that maybe wants to put out of its misery straight away. But on the other hand, that out of that kind of process of just like random mashing up, I bet you one of those will turn out to be brilliant.
Iain, speaking of mashups of a sort, I believe there's been another merger.
There has been another merger, but not a murder, a merger between Wizards of the Coast and acquired Tuque Games. Now, this is a digital game studio based in Montreal. They are already involved in the development of a game based on Dungeons and Dragons. So this is obviously a digital acquisition for Wizards of the Coast, or WOTC. And they have said in an announcement, in Tuque, we believe we have found a unique partner that pairs the nimbleness of an indie studio with the veteran leadership and scale required to deliver complex AAA games for our largest franchises. If you're not familiar with the term AAA games, that refers to your things like Call of Duty, Football Manager, sort of big computer game releases is what they're talking about there. So it sounds like Wizards of the Coast have got some interesting ambitions on the horizon. James, as our financial correspondent, what do you think of this merger?
Well, I'm really interested by this merger because something that we're seeing increasingly is particularly large game companies, you looked at Asmodee, for example, are getting digital divisions and trying to build up digital product ranges. In Asmodee's case, I believe most of the work is actually outsourced rather than an in-house digital studio. But
yeah, I think that's right.
But actually, it would make total logic to buy those companies because fundamentally there is a little bit of a merger of digital and tabletop tech going on. I mean, firstly, there's the IP level of this. If you own an IP and you've got a great board game already, trust me, you want to make a computer game of it. Because if you do, it's just additional revenue stream, additional advertising for the board game. There's no reason not to do that. And secondly, the games themselves, is in the other direction, you've got technology kind of coming more into board games too. So, and computer games like Hearthstone, where they're like conceived of as a card game. So, increasingly, if you want to make great experiences you can franchise effectively, you want to make them in every way you can. And the same way that companies like Disney are vertically integrated, this is exactly clearly what people like Wizards of the Coast are doing as well. And why not?
Yeah, we're seeing so many app versions of games now, and it does, from all the things I've read on it, it doesn't detract from the board game, and in fact, like you say, actually enhances sales of the board game because people can get a demo effectively for like $5 on their phone and then go, hey, this is quite good. I'd quite like to play this with my friends, and go out and seek out the board game and buy it. And I've seen some apps where actually they just link to like a board game store where you can go and buy the app, buy the board game, which is the smart thing to do. And yeah, we're just seeing more and more of that.
Iain, you've got some news out of Chicago.
Indeed. It seems that the chaps behind Cards Against Humanity are taking their business to a different level and opening up a board game cafe. Now, this is going to be a full-service board game cafe opening up in Chicago, by which we mean it's going to be serving like actual food and beer and all sorts of stuff in the cafe, as well as having a games library housed in an actual converted bank vault, which is kind of cool. They also have 2 escape rooms, something that we've seen in some of the board game cafes in Edinburgh as well, where we've got like sort of cafe up top, escape rooms down the bottom. Max Temkin, who's the co-creator of Cards Against Humanity, said, we've been making games for almost 10 years now, and we've seen that games, food, and theatre have an incredible capacity to bring people together and create community. It has been our dream for a long time to do a really ambitious version of a games cafe and share it with people. We hope it doesn't fail in an embarrassing fashion. As straightforward and straight talking as always from Max Temkin, who's an interesting individual. Although I'm not a great fan of Cards Against Humanity itself, the company is really interesting and has done a lot of really cool things in the past, including doing things like buying bits of the border along Mexico-America so that Trump can build his wall in a certain bit and that kind of thing. So they're a really interesting, disruptive company. Yeah.
The theatre aspect of Max Temkin's statement refers to the House Theatre of Chicago, which is a non-profit local theatre company who is building the escape rooms.
Like I say, the game I don't really care for, but they've always been very generous. They've got quite an entrepreneurial spirit, the Cards Against Humanity guys, and they've always been very generous to charities and all sorts around them. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see their version of a games cafe, and maybe it'll have some influence on other ones around the world. You got any games cafes in your town, James?
Yes, I do. I have an excellent local games cafe here in Croydon called the Ludicrous.
The famous
yes.
Ludicrous.
Yeah, they've got. It's amazing. It's pretty big compared to most of the board game cafes. I think it's about 1,500, maybe 2,000 games. I can't remember the exact number, but it's a very big collection. And what I like about it most is that it's right on the high street with these just massive glass, big circular window. So it's just really light in there as well. Which often, like pokey places, I mean, by just because you can't afford anything anything bigger than something that's quite small sometimes, you don't get that effect. So I think what Nick, the guy who set it up, is doing with it, I love it. It's I feel very lucky that one of my favourite game cafes, and I think one of the best there is, happens to be 10 minutes walk from my flat.
Fantastic. I'll have to come and visit.
Absolutely, please do. Welcome anytime.
And just before we leave the cast for today and go into the inevitability of Monopoly news, just a little update on the Kickstarter union shenanigans. They are currently asking senior management to be neutral in the elections if they are to be called. They are now sort of taking the stance that they will have to go to elections as the Kickstarter management have asked. At the moment, they are still not asking people to boycott Kickstarter, and as ever, we would encourage people to follow the lead of Kickstarter Union in their calls to help out. But yes, I think it's just about time to wrap this one up.
It's the end of the show! And, of course, there is Monopoly news. And this is not a copy of Monopoly. It is, in fact, a show of Monopoly. In fact, it is an immersive show about Monopoly. With recently, a partnership has been announced between Hasbro and Celador Worldwide, who is an international touring theatre company, for an immersive Monopoly theatrical experience, which will run in 2020. Or as it's more commonly known, 2020, in London in an as-yet undisclosed location. Maybe it's going to be on one of the streets in the UK edition.
I mean, it's got to be, really, hasn't it? Where else? If you don't have it there, what are they doing?
I know.
Yeah,
Call
missed
themselves an
opportunity.
events company.
Otherwise,
I mean, to be honest, it's either going to be Mayfair or Old Kent Road. I know there are other ones, but they're the two most famous.
I would guess Old Kent Road will be the only one with affordable space.
Ah.
So, and absolutely garbage public transport.
Probably.
So maybe not such a great choice. I don't know.
David Hutchinson, the chief executive of Celador Worldwide, has said, "Trends in our sector are moving in a very exciting direction, with demand from a new generation of theatre-goers looking to experience live theatre differently, and to be immersed in the world of the narrative in a different way." Which, coming from my theatrical background, I completely agree. I think it's a great idea. The other side is tinged with, but Monopoly. But that's just me. It will include a 75-minute segment where teams will compete to win tasks in order to move along the board, buy properties, and attempt to win the game.
But they should know it will never end.
Of course, never win
because it will never end. So
you enter the theatre and you never leave,
and you never leave until everyone just agrees just to call it quits because they can't actually finish the game. That would be the appropriate way for it to end.
Something very quickly that we came across just before we go is one-page dungeon. We'll put a link to this in the show notes, but this is an awesome little page you can go to and generate single-page dungeons that are randomly generated every time you click on the screen, and just really cool little things for your D&D or whatever campaign. Go and check that out. It's really neat, and chuck the creator some money as well if you feel like it. And talking about chucking people money, we'd love to give a little shout out to our executive producers, the Lucky Sparrow Gaming Cafe. Thank you very much for your continued support. Yeah, if you'd like to support this cast with your fine money, then you can do so through Patreon. If you give us $1 a month, you will get an extended version of every one of our casts. For $2 a month, you will also get access to our sister cast called Idle Thoughts, where people like James come on and talk about the games they have played recently. We are just going to be recording that after this cast is done. And for $5 a month, you can join the executive producers of the Lucky Sparrow Gaming Cafe in becoming executive producers and maybe coming on the cast sometime as well. Now, James, I know that we talked about selling you the place. Jamie, have you come to a conclusion about whether we should sell Brainwaves HQ to James? Its offer is very good and it is limited time.
It's a no from me.
Well, I hate to tell you, Jamie, actually the offer came off the table 30 minutes ago.
What?
I was informed by Mr. I won't say his name, that he no longer is interested in property because he's actually gone and bought the We're Not Wizards podcast studio instead in order to build a gigantic tower on golf course. So as a result, the offer's gone.
Well.
Oh well.
I mean,
I guess we're stuck with the thing in the basement.
Yeah.
But they need to do something about that someday.
It's fine. Don't worry. Sam will come back and deal with it one day. James, thank you so very much for stepping in and being our financial correspondent and guest today.
You are more than welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Now, where can the lovely listeners contact you, find out more about you, find out more about Magnate the First City? Please tell all.
So the place to go is magnategame.com. They can check out the game there and they can sign up to our mailing list. So when our Kickstarter goes live, they will get an email. Other place to look I would always recommend is Board Game Geek. Lots of people have already been playing the game. We've been on tour with it now for about a year, taking it to conventions all up and down the country. And playtesting with all sorts of people. So there's already some thoughts there for check out. Find out if it's a game that you think is for you. Obviously all the usual social media things as well. Facebook, Instagram, and then if you want to listen to my own inane witterings on board game design and such things, then my own Twitter account of @NaylorJames is probably the place to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, James. It's been a real pleasure having you on. And thank you very much for listening. If you like what you've listened to, then the best way to help us out is to share the podcast about and drop us a review and rating on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter @TheGiantBrain. We're also on Instagram and Facebook. Our website is giantbrain.co.uk, and you can email us about anything in the show, and if you'd like to get in touch and chat to us about anything in the show at all, it's giantbrainuk@gmail.com. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.